This is Dave Slayer. This is my Christmas tree. This is 2018, I think, isn't it? Check, yeah. It's Tuesday, November 13th, 2018. Yeah, so anyway, this is my Christmas tree. I'll probably put a few more decorations on it and then top it off with some tinsel. I'll probably wait till after Thanksgiving to do that to give it a little bit more Christmas magic, you know. So anyway, I'm here to record another testimony. I was saved December 26th of 1996. The exact time, I don't remember. But that was the day, and it was at night, I remember. Probably middle evening. And I'll like to explain how I got to that point. Growing up as a child, I remember going to church a few times here and there. I don't know if there was ever a time where we went every week. I think some people in our family, you know, went to church and we went with them a few times. And I remember in high school, my parents wanted to take us to church and stuff. And actually back then I didn't want to go. I'd rather stay home and listen to music or something. So back in high school, 9th grade, I think is when it started. I listened to Slayer. Slayer is a thrash band, thrash metal. A lot of their lyrics are satanic themed. I don't know if they're satanic themselves, but that was the music I listened to a lot back then. I wasn't trying to be satanic, it's just that was the music I listened to. I liked the sound of it. So I wore a Slayer hat and a Slayer t-shirt, and I had Slayer often in my Walkman when I was at school. So people just called me Dave Slayer after a while. And yeah, so that's how the name Dave Slayer came along. I still use it. I guess you can say I'm David the Demon Slayer or whatever. Some people call me Dave Slayer the True Prayer. I like that a little bit better. I also listen to other heavy metal bands like Sepultura, Metallica, Overkill, Anthrax, and others. So in high school one day, this would have been 10th grade, I was sitting in front of a kid or behind a kid that had he had a Heaven's Metal magazine, and I asked him about it. And that ultimately led to a conversation about Christian metal. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I asked him to borrow some tapes, and that's how it got started. That's where my quest for God began, I believe. He loaned me some tapes, I bought some tapes. Back then the bands were Living Sacrifice, Tourniquet, Mortification, Sacrament, you know, Sacred Warrior, you know, Deliverance, bands along that line. And I was like, wow, this is pretty good, you know. And back then I wasn't really in the music for the message, whether it's Christian or satanic, so I just listened to it if it sounded good. So ever since then, I began asking questions about God. I'd call my friends from school and talk to them about God. And, you know, I listened to them, but then kind of said, you know, I have all my life. I can get saved later. I graduated in 1996, and that's the year that I got saved. So it wasn't really too long after I was introduced to Christian metal that I gave my life to the Lord, just a couple years. So obviously I didn't wait too long. Thankfully the Lord kept me alive to experience this. I remember one incident that got my attention. I think it was around 10th grade, around the same time as I was introduced to Christian metal. I was riding my bike and I got hit by a truck, probably a drunk driver. We never did catch the person who did it. But anyway, hopefully that person's right with the Lord, I hope. So I ended up breaking my arm that day, and I've never broken my arm before, so I didn't know what it felt like to break a bone. I've never broke a bone in my body, so that didn't feel very good, and then I had to get a cast on it and then go to the hospital and all that. But what was interesting about that event, and I don't like to spiritualize things too much, but I was riding my bike and I was on the wrong side of the road so I could see the oncoming traffic, and you know, in the distance I saw a truck coming at me, and it was coming faster and faster, and it got closer to the edge of the road where I was. And as it got really close to me, I felt something nudging me to the left and pulling me, you know, off the road. Obviously what happened was the mirror of the truck hit my bike handles, and that's what knocked me over, and the mirror broke off this truck, and you know, we found it down the road. But it was just interesting that I felt something nudging me. And it's almost like I felt that nudge prior to the truck hitting me. So that was real interesting. And somebody at a Christian bookstore said, yeah, that was probably God. That might have been an angel looking out for you. That was an experience that kind of got my attention, because it's like, you know what, our life is short. Anything could happen anywhere, without any notice. So I give God the glory that I'm here. I didn't really have a whole lot of church experience growing up, as I explained earlier. In high school, there was a class that I was in. It was called transition class. It took up a 3-hour block of school. And it was for people who needed some special needs, people that were a little bit slower at learning than others, went to that class. There was a gentleman by the name of Dan Millward that would come in every week. I forget which day. But he would bring a big box of donuts and some orange juice, and of course we all looked forward to that. And then once a week or so he would take a few of us out to breakfast if we got good grades and stuff. So that was fun, and he was a Christian, and I think he took us to a church at one time. But yeah, so anyway, I got to know this guy named Dan through that. I kept in touch with him throughout school. He helped give me rides to places and stuff like that. So, real nice guy. And he liked Pepsi, and I always teased him about it. And if I see him now, I still give him a Pepsi if I can remember, or if I'm able to do it. So, it's kind of something that we have between us. So anyway, I kept in touch with Dan, after high school, and especially after I got saved. I would call him and sometimes talk to him about spiritual issues that I was, struggling with. And, I'd read a Bible verse and say, hey, Dan, does this verse mean I need to do this and this and this? And, just ask some questions and stuff. And at that time, I wasn't part of a church family or a church body. I was kind of a lone ranger, I guess you could say. But I wanted to talk to people, that were Christian. So I had him, and I had some friends that were Christian. And back then, I watched a lot of Christian TV, on TV televangelists like TBN and stuff. And that's where I got most of my church from. So I watched a lot of televangelists, and, that's how I got my church then. Some might say, okay, well, Dave, you attend Bedside Baptist. That's just a figure of speech, laying in your bed watching TBN or whatever. So that's where I got my church from, and that equipped me in so many ways. I remember in high school, there was a couple times where I went to an Assemblies of God church. I knew there was a youth group there, and one time they had a Christian metal concert, and I went to that. So after high school, I was aware that church was there. So after I became saved, I think after a couple years, I went there a few times, visited, and I wanted to have a church family, I think, and meet some new friends. So that's what I did. I didn't go there regularly, but I went there, fairly often. And then there was a time where I didn't go to church at all. I don't know if I felt that I didn't need it or that it was unimportant or whatever, but I just didn't always go. So, I was kind of on my own again, I feel. I had my music, I had my Bible, and I had praying and stuff, which are all important things. But it eventually began to lead me down a path of spiritual bondage that I really can't quite explain, other than just saying that I went through it. And I will attribute some of it to the way I interpreted some of the Bible messages that I've seen on TV or just interpreted in church. And I think because I have an overactive mind, I interpret things very differently from which they were originally intended. So I do think too much about a lot of stuff. Sometimes I would spiritualize everything a lot to the point where every little turn that came in my life is this God? Because this happened, is this God? Because I went through this stoplight, is it because of God? Okay, God's telling me to wear this color of socks today, or God's telling me to have macaroni and cheese for dinner rather than spaghetti, or there was just a lot of silly things like that I felt God was telling me to do. And the problem with it is I began to, every little thing that happened, it's like, okay, God's telling me to do something, and if I don't obey God, then, I'm in trouble. I'm not going to be living spiritually correct. So I went through a lot of that stuff. I could get into more of these silly examples that I was telling you about God telling me to do something, and then if I didn't do it, I would feel guilty. I felt so much bondage, and I'm like, if this is from God, God's looking to give me peace, not bondage. And it took me a while to learn